All right, I'm here. Wherever you might be joining us from, thank you so much for joining us on a Monday. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. My name is Josh, and this is the Jmull Show. Thank you so much for joining us once again on a Monday. It was a busy weekend. After the end of last week being not so busy. If you didn't get a chance to listen or watch the show from Friday, I'd very much appreciate it. What I talked about in the first segment, I was really proud of, and if you have a chance to go back and watch that, I'd very much appreciate it. Well, we got a lot to get to today. Some NBA stuff. We're getting very close to the end of the first round of the NBA playoffs. So where we're going to start today is all about what we've learned. If it, yeah, I did see your previous message. We'll start with the NBA playoffs, where we are now. The 5 things that we've learned from the playoffs, and really from the bubble as an extension, but a lot of it revolves around the playoffs. Just a couple of things that are more all encompassing than just the last couple weeks in the playoffs. There was also a college football game on Saturday, so we're going to talk about that. A thrilling showdown between Austin Peay and Central Arkansas, so we'll talk about that in a little while as well. But like I said, thank you so much for joining us here on a Monday. Where I want to start is with the NBA playoffs. So, these playoffs were always going to be interesting. They were always going to be unorthodox, just from the nature of the bubble and the fact that there are just some things that typically are a really big deal in the playoffs that just aren't this season because everything's being played on a neutral court. I mean, we had both the 4 and 5 seeds in both conferences were up for grabs on the last day of the regular season, and it just didn't matter. On the last day of the regular season, teams just essentially lost home court advantage, and it didn't matter because there is no home court advantage, which is where I want to start with the most important thing about this, and that's just that momentum doesn't really exist here. Because the best way to capitalize on momentum is to go home and to win games at home after gaining momentum on the road. 3 different teams, the Mavericks, Blazers, and Magic, a 7 seed and 2 8 seeds, they all won the first game of their series. Excuse me. The Mavericks didn't win the first game of this series, but they won one of the 2 games that would have quote unquote in LA. And that's all you're trying to do as any seed that doesn't have home court advantage. You're trying to win one of those first 2 games on your opponent's home floor. Because then all of a sudden you're in the driver's seat and you're going back to Orlando or to Portland or to Dallas, and it's 1-1, and you have a chance to go up 3-1, and you really like your chances to win at least one of those 2 games, and then you're 4 games in, it's 2-2, and it's a best of 3 series, and there's a reason that there are no best of 3 series for the most part in the major sports in this country. You got best of 7s, you got a best of 5 in the first round, in the divisional round of MLB playoffs. But apart from, there's a reason that there are no best of 3 series, because best of 3 series are fluky, and anybody can win a best of 3 series. So there's a lot of momentum that comes from winning that one game on somebody else's home floor. But for teams like the Mavericks, the Magic, the Blazers, any lower seeded team that's playing a team that is clearly better than them, the task doesn't change at all from winning one game like it usually does when you're playing in home arenas, because now the task, you win, you steal one of those first two games, which is always the best opportunity to steal a game. Teams aren't feeling it. One of the what makes better teams so hard to beat is they do a great job adjusting and exploiting weaknesses and covering up the strengths that their opponent has. And three different teams did that. Only one team won another game, and that team only won one other game, and that's the Mavericks, who officially lost to the Clippers in the first round. Got eliminated last night. There, you win one game in a normal regular, and then you don't have to win another game on the Clippers' home floor. You win one game, and then you can win the series in 6 and never have to touch the other team's home floor again. Win a basketball game on the other team's home floor again. You can win your 2 games at home in games 3 and 4, lose game 5, and win game 6, and you win 4-2. Certainly easier said than done against a team that's better than you are, but that makes the task seem a lot less daunting after you win one game on the road. And nothing changes when you win one game in the bubble, which is why you're seeing, specifically in the Eastern Conference, and we'll get to this one in a little bit, but the better teams in the Eastern Conference just dispatched of the other teams. And we can have a conversation about whether or not the Nuggets have a chance to beat the Jazz, come back from 3-1 down, and we can have a conversation about who's the better team, the Rockets or the Thunder, but the Rockets, the 4 seed, and in some ways certainly the better basketball team. But you win one game and you still got to win 3 more games in the exact same situation, which is just really daunting and really, really hard to do against a team that's better than you. And that's what you saw with Dallas. Now, it would have been a lot more interesting if Dallas had a completely healthy Luka, who was still awesome. He averaged, I think it was 31, 9, and 9 in that series. But you didn't have Kristaps. You had injuries from prior to the suspension of the NBA season, pre-COVID-19, that also kept them from being completely healthy. So it would have been more interesting if they're completely healthy, but it's just so hard to beat the Clippers in 4 of 7 games, no matter what, much less when they get to play you on a neutral court all 6 games. And then it takes, 47, 17, and 13 or whatever it was from Luka to win a game in overtime, and it's just not going to happen 7 times. It's not going to happen 4 times in 7 games against a team as good as the Clippers. And you just get no any advantage you could gain from winning a game against the better team. It just isn't there like it usually is. Portland and Orlando never seriously threatened to win another game, and Dallas lost their last 2 games by a combined 57 points. The Clippers figured them out. Luka wasn't completely healthy. Kawhi continues to get better on the scoring side of things every single playoffs he's in, including this one. He's incredibly efficient, and he's basically he's going to get you 32 every night. At least that's what he did in round 1 of the playoffs against the Mavericks. It's really quite impressive how good Kawhi was, and it makes sense that the Mavericks weren't able to seriously threaten to get to that game 7, and then at that point you really get to a toss-up. But momentum isn't going to help you win a series in these playoffs. You're going to have to be better than the other team, and I guess that's another way you can put this, is that you're going to have to be the better team for 7 games to win a series in these playoffs, because you can be the better team there are just times when you can be the better team for 3 games, and then you're at home for 1, and you're not really the better team as much as the other team's just having a bad day in your building. You know what I mean? And that's just not going to be the case here. We've also learned that the top of the Eastern Conference is really good, like elite. but the depth of the West is what maintains it as the best conference in the NBA. One win between the bottom 4 teams in the Eastern Conference. One. And it was the Magic who beat the Bucks in game 1. After that, nobody else won a game. The Bucks won 4 straight, and then the Raptors, the Celtics, and the Heat all swept their series. Went 12-0 combined. Right now, seeds 5 through 8 in the West have won 8 games. And we're still talking about the Jazz have a chance to win another one and win that series in 7. The Thunder are currently down 3-2, I believe is the case at the moment. But we're talking about a world in which 2 teams from the West that are the lower seeded teams move on to the second round. And I know we talked about better team in that first point, but OKC might be the better team, and Utah, because Denver's defense is so bad, Utah might be the net better team in that series. We'll see. Jmull Murray has been absolutely ridiculous. But the point being is that the thing that makes the Western Conference so great is that there are 11 teams every year who have real aspirations of making the playoffs. I mean, look at you don't have to look any farther than the play-in game situation that we saw in the West. On the final day, you had the Grizzlies, Trailblazers, Suns, and Spurs, who all 4 teams for 1 spot. Well, 2 spots technically with the play-in, but you're essentially trying to get to that 1 spot, that 8 seed. You had 4 teams that, like, if the ball rolled right on that day, they were going to be in one of the play-in games. There wasn't a play-in game in the East because the Wizards were so bad that even though the Magic were pretty uninspiring, to say the least, in those 8 seeding games, the Magic were out after like 3 games. And then you get to the playoffs, and those bottom 4 teams win 1 game. 1 total. Not in each series, but 1 across 4 series from those 4 teams. And then in the West, you've got 4 teams winning 8 games combined. And that's with 1 team in Portland playing the 1 seed. So it's you're getting 7 wins from 3 teams essentially, and there could be more. There probably will be more. At least 1 more. I would probably bet on the Nuggets in game. Yeah, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure the Jazz have enough. We'll see. I mean, Jmull Murray had to score 50, and they won by what, it was 12 or something last night. But the point being is that the bottom of the West is still incredibly competitive. I mean, the Trailblazers and the Mavericks, they're both going to be, there were 8 teams in the playoffs. There are teams on the outside looking in the West, and like in the Grizzlies, who should have a healthy Jaren Jackson Jr. back next year, a healthy Justice Winslow, John Morant with another year, with another offseason to get better and another offseason to improve on the spots that he was weak this year. The Suns, who might actually have a bright future, but would you pick either of those teams to out the teams that are in the playoffs right now? And that's without Golden State, who will be back in the playoffs next year. Right there, that's 11 teams. And you got New Orleans, who's still got a very interesting roster in Zion Williamson. That's 12 teams. I mean, the Kings were pretty close. That's 14 teams. The Timberwolves are getting D'Lo, Karl Anthony Towns, and the number 1 overall pick. That might be 15. Am I missing anybody? That's literally everybody. That going into next season says, okay, like there is a road for us to make the playoffs. That's just not the case in the East. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, even the bright future of the Hawks. I mean, the Hawks aren't great. Even with John Collins and Trae Young, still not great. The West have the top 2 picks, and the West have the top 2 picks next season. So the best, the talent at the very top of the draft is going to the West, unless there's some sort of trade. But right now it's Minnesota, and you go Minnesota and Golden State. So I'm not sure, like, if it. I mean, the top of the East is incredibly competitive, and in a lot of ways, I think the top of the East this season is better than the top of the West. But once you get past that 4 spot, it's just not the same. And I know that there's some injuries in the East too, but there have been some injuries in the West too. And even with, no Kristaps really and not a 100% Luka, the Mavs still took the Clippers to 6 games. Mm. The Mavericks have arrived, man. Speaking of the Mavericks, and we've talked about this some, but I mean, Luka is a top 5 player in the NBA already, and it's going to be a perennial all-star. Their offense is so good. And you added pieces that you didn't really know you had in guys like Trey Burke, who had to step up when you had injuries. They're going to be healthier next year. It might not be next year that it won't be next year that they're really seriously considered to win a title, but it won't be long. Luka and the Mavs are coming fast. Jmull Murray is a bad, bad man. Also, Luka, 31 points, 8.7 assists, 9.8 rebounds. The kid's 21 and was playing against the 2 best perimeter defenders in the NBA. That's crazy. We just don't see talent like that. He really is special, and he's only 21, which is really quite scary. I mean, we're still talking about, 5 years until he's in his prime. You know what I mean? Like, we're talking about 5 years until he's in his prime. So much time. He's already so good, and he clearly has that it factor. Whatever it is, the competitiveness, the ability to do it in the playoffs, he's got it. Whatever it is, whatever you actually have to have it, he's got it. He's been very impressive. Trey Burke, like I said, he averaged 12.3 points against the Clippers, reminding people why he was a first-round pick. The fact that he actually can score at the NBA level. He had a 25-point game in that 135-133 overtime win, the game that Luka hit the buzzer beater in overtime. You add that guy on your bench, then you've got, Seth Curry, Trey Burke, Tim Hardaway Jr. was great as well, that Michigan duo. There's a lot of reasons to be a really big fan of the Mavericks, and not to mention that the best teams in the NBA, they're going to be games where they just have to outscore the Mavericks because they're not going to be able to stop it. They're not going to be able to do it with defense. They're going to have to outscore them. And now the Clippers, thankfully, along with having 2 elite perimeter defenders, also have, like I mentioned earlier, Kawhi Leonard, who's good for 30. And in the most eventful way ever, he's just the king of looking up and like, oh yeah, he's 13 of 20 from the floor and has 32 points. It's a shame that the Mavs weren't healthy. It was very, very interesting even without them being healthy, but we'll see. I don't think it'll be all that long before we're talking about the Mavericks as serious contenders and adding them to the equation of the top of the Western Conference, because when you look at the teams in the West that are the best, the life left, the Mavericks are at the top of that list in terms of how much life they have left. Because, I mean, you got 3 years basically with the Clippers, and you're not sure what's happening after that. You don't have much longer than that with the Lakers. LeBron's 35. Steph Curry's not young. And how many more chances are they going to get? Maybe, 2 or 3. Where they really have a team that can compete for the title. Maybe 4. But in 4 years, Luka will be 25. And if they continue to improve and continue to contend, then why not hang out there with Kristaps and be a contender in the West? Dallas isn't a bad place to live. We're going to be talking about the Mavericks for a long time, and we've been reminded of that in the first round of the playoffs. Jmull Murray is a bad man, and it still might not be enough because the Nuggets' defense is laughably bad, even against a team like the Jazz, who are missing huge pieces of the offensive attack. Huge pieces. Even if they don't win Game 7 and finish off the comeback, Jmull Murray is still turning into a superstar right in front of us. 39.3 points on 67% shooting, including 19 3-pointers in the 3 games that's not even including his other 50-point performance in a game that they lost. Scored 50 again on August 30th to force a Game 7 and a game in which he went toe-to-toe with Donovan Mitchell again, who is also a bad man, by the way. There are still concerns about his ability to impact a game when he's not shooting it well, i.e. 14 points and 12 points in games 2 and 3, 12 points and 14. Either way. But Murray has emerged as a superstar and one who's up for the challenge of the playoffs. He also has it, whatever it is. He and Donovan Mitchell both have been just an absolute blast to watch. And the most important thing about this is I'm of the belief that there's only a certain level your team can reach when the best player on your team is a big guy. Even a big guy as versatile as Nikola Jokic. Because at some point you just need the guy to be able to go get himself a bucket. And Jokic is one of those weird cases. He's a guy who can create shots for others because he's such a great passer that can't create shots for himself. And typically those two things go hand in hand. Because if you can get shots for others, that typically means that you're able to do enough by yourself to put pressure on the defense. And if you can do enough to put pressure on the defense, you typically can do enough to get your own shot. But Jokic is a big guy. And you put him in good positions, and he just makes incredible decisions in those positions. But having a guy like Murray, who you're really confident in going and scoring 30-plus night in and night out in the playoffs, just means something different. Now, of course, they're not going to win anything substantial without Jokic playing really well as well, of course. And I still think Jokic is the best player on this team, but a guy like Murray who has the ball in his hands as much as he does, I really think that elevates the ceiling as long as they improve on the defensive end. I mean, it's not going to be this year. I mean, even if they win Game 7 against the Jazz, they're going to lose to the Clippers in round 2. So it doesn't really matter this year. But if they improve on the defensive side of the ball in the offseason, and then maybe Michael Porter Jr. becomes a competent defender, not even a good one, just a competent one. He looks so lost on the defensive end right now. So lost. Even if that happens, and you've got a guy like Murray along with Jokic, and then Michael Porter Jr. continues to improve. You got Gary Harris, Will Barton, which that's also been an underrated part of this series, is that you just haven't had those guys. Then you put all those pieces together, and then Denver's a very, very interesting basketball team next year. But Murray being that guy just makes the ceiling a little bit higher. I mean, ask Brett Brown and the Sixers about how far you can go with your best player being a big guy. Too soon? Maybe. But it's still true. And I still, Murray's becoming a superstar very, very quickly. And he's doing it with his team's back against the wall, which is another impressive part of this. Is that he's performing at a very high level when he has to. I mean, he scored 50 last night, and they needed all 50 to win that game. Needed all 50, and he gave them all 50. And that's another part of this that is very, very important. And then finally, the thing that we've learned is that these playoffs, and this is the one that sort of includes the bubble, but these playoffs and the bubble, even these weird circumstances this time still counts towards the your time is ticking clock. And what I mean by that is that coaches who were already on a short leash, or coaches that you're wondering if they were ever going to succeed any more than they have at this point, front offices are still jumping at the chance to fire coaches if they get the chance and they're on the market. Alvin Gentry. There's an argument he never really had a healthy team this season. You still don't know exactly what you could have gotten out of him along with a really healthy roster. He didn't really have Zion Williamson in the 8 games because Zion came back late, and so they just sort of pushed the easing him into the games back. And so Zion basically watched the Pelicans play themselves out of the playoffs from the bench. 14 minutes a game. I mean, you might as well just not even come to the bubble. But he's gone pretty much immediately. Brett Brown, who once again is at the mercy of Elton Brand's inability to make competent decisions on the front as a general manager. And he also didn't have his, by definition, top 15 player in the NBA because Ben Simmons was going to be an all-NBA player this season. By definition, one of the 15 best players in the NBA didn't have him. And so you get swept by a Celtics team that is good enough to go to the NBA Finals. That situation in Philly has nothing to do with Brett Brown. Now, it was probably time to move on from Brett Brown. But the circumstances in the bubble, the fact that Shake Milton is your point guard, Tobias Harris was playing like crap, Joel Embiid still isn't in shape, and Ben Simmons gets hurt and isn't there for the playoffs, he still gets bounced. He doesn't get any more leash because of the circumstances. And then Nate McMillan, who 183 and 136 in his 4 seasons with the Pacers. But he's 3-16 in the playoffs. Was before he got relieved of his duties right after the Heat finished off the sweep over the Pacers. He did really well this year with what he had and turned guys that were coming off the bench into much more than role players. And you didn't have Sabonis. I don't think Oladipo's really been truly healthy in 2 years now. Not sure that's McMillan's fault. But because he still hasn't been good in the playoffs, and he gets swept again, you jump at the opportunity. And he played. They played well in the seeding games. They ended up with the 4 seed maybe. They definitely ousted the Sixers. Let's see here. Yeah, ended up with the 4 seed, 45-28 without Oladipo for most of the season. And then you end up with a non-healthy team again in the playoffs. You get swept and you get fired. The circumstances of the bubble did not save coaches who were on the hot seat. Brett Brown was on the hot seat. Gentry was probably on the hot seat. I didn't think McMillan was on the hot seat, but clearly it was, considering how fast he got fired. The bubble didn't save coaches. And the fact that players were injured didn't save coaches, because we're seeing it happen. And unless the Rockets win the NBA Finals, bye D'Antoni. Indiana, go hire D'Antoni. The coaching carousel is still here, even though a lot of this, and this is just the reality of the situation in the NBA now, is that most of the time it's not the coach's fault. Most of the time, not the coach's fault. But the coach is the scapegoat in the NBA. And it's reigning true again, even if we're in the bubble under a lot of unforeseen circumstances. Coming up next, Central Arkansas and Austin Peay. They played football on Saturday. Let's talk about the return of college football in this era of COVID-19. We'll do that next on the Jmull Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the Jmull Show on a Monday. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for making us part of your day. It's a Monday. And typically, on August 31st, we'd have had a lot of football over the weekend. Not this weekend, but we did have football this weekend. The Austin Peay Governors, take a 24-17 defeat by the hands of the Central Arkansas Bears. Jeremiah Oatsvall, 14 of 31, and 1 interception. C.J. Evans Jr. on his first rush in his home state as a college football player takes it back for a touchdown. He ended up with 10 carries, 98 yards. It's a pretty good first game overall, but college football is going to be weird this season. And we can have a conversation about whether or not we should have college football at all. We've had that conversation on this show. But you type in college football in Google, and the first things are about how there are, another 12 people that have tested positive for coronavirus. There's another guy that has opted out of the 2020-21 season. Maybe the news. Maybe we should just look at what what we're having to report on, and maybe that would tell us a little something. But with that being said, the atmosphere is weird, man. You can almost, when you think college football, you can hear the marching band, you can hear the cheerleaders and the screaming fans. It's almost synonymous with the word. Neither team had brought their marching band to Montgomery. Central Arkansas had 9 cheerleaders, but they had to stay in the stands rather than on the sideline. During the national anthem, it was just reporters and photographers, and the Crampton Bowl that holds 25,000 people only had 2,000 fans in attendance. Now, all things that are necessary. If we really want to have college football, we have to give up other things. And part of that, from Notre Dame announces stadium capacity 20 or less with faculty and staff. Yeah, 20% or less tickets to Notre Dame students, faculty, and staff. No outside fans. Mask required. No tailgating. These are all, outside fans. Jay, we've been to a Notre Dame football game together. Those games are crazy. And the tailgating is crazy. The entire place is just swamped with tailgating wherever you go. People are on lawns. People are in parking lots. It's a massive party every Saturday that culminates with a football game. I think that, there are some professional sport, and all sports to a certain extent, I think, are the fans and the atmosphere in part make the sport. But as we've seen with the NBA, they've done. I personally think they've done a phenomenal job recreating some sort of atmosphere in the bubble. It's just going to be impossible to recreate in any sort of atmosphere, because in most regular season games, except for the highly touted ones, the Sunday afternoon games between the 2 best teams in the NBA, the Christmas Day games, there are a lot of just regular NBA games in the regular season that are just, the atmosphere is okay, but it's a Tuesday night and, people got off work and they're going to have some food and a drink while they watch the game, and you've got some kids in the stands. It's just not quite like the diehard fan thing. 100,000 person football stadium is packed with diehard fans. Very rarely do people who have no vested interest in either team go to a football game, to a college football game, just for fun. Because especially for the way college football works, I mean, if you don't have a vested interest in a specific team, the best way to enjoy college football is to have some beers on the couch and flip between games. I mean, why go and pay money to watch one game you don't really care about when you could watch all of them for free? And so what you get is the fans, and the fact that it's on a college campus, of course, and that it's filled with, a ton of 18 to 22-year-olds. What you get is crazy atmospheres, and really the epitome of college athletics is the atmosphere that's created. In many ways, Cameron Indoor Stadium is more famous than the Duke basketball program. Hinkle Fieldhouse is absolutely more famous than the Butler basketball program, or any of Butler athletics for that matter. But Hinkle Empty is eerie, and I've spent a lot of time in Hinkle Empty. It's a bit eerie, and it echoes more than most places. And so the idea of watching a Butler game on TV with no fans, I mean, I've played basketball with no fans in the middle, in Hinkle Fieldhouse. That's way too relatable. The ESPN announcers, Matt Berry and Mike Golick Jr., called the game from the studio in Bristol. It's just weird. And like I said earlier, if we're going to have college football, this is how we're going to do it. We're not going to try to convince ourselves that because it's outside that this is something we can do, and that, let's put 80% fan capacity out there and it'll be fine. 20% capacity is right. Get a couple people in there. If they're spaced out, then, a lot of the information and data we have shows that outside it's a whole lot more difficult, and there's a lot less transmitting of COVID-19 when you're outside. So not having any fans, it might be slightly unnecessary, but certainly you can't have a lot. I'll be interested to see what the atmosphere looks like for these bigger football games. I mean, football is football, so we like it, and this game was competitive. I mean, 24-17, it's a competitive football game, and there were some wild things happen. Like I said, first play of scrimmage was a 75-yard touchdown. There was botched special teams plays. There was, everything we've come to know and love from college football. But it's going to be weird. Listen, Austin Peay plays 3 games this fall. They play at Pittsburgh on September 12th and Cincinnati on September 19th. After the Ohio Valley Conference postponed all fall sports, the Southland Conference also postponed its fall season, but Central Arkansas still scheduled 9 games, including a pair of home and homes with Eastern Kentucky and Missouri State. Where do we go from here? You know what I mean? And there's so much disconnect between conferences, and so much disconnect between what each conference is going to do and what their plan is that you don't really know. If there's a Big Ten schedule in the spring, will the College Football Committee, Playoff Committee, which, first of all, the NCAA has no power over the college football playoff. So any rules about any rules the NCAA has just don't apply to college football playoff. In case there are people who weren't aware of that. But will the college football playoff, push back the college football playoff if the Big Ten starts a schedule, in December or whatever it might be? We don't really know. I mean, there was this one football game, but okay, what comes next? When will we get football against, between FBS teams? This was an FCS football game. You know what I mean? So there's so many questions still up in the air, but we did have football. We did have football, and honestly, I didn't think that was actually going to happen. Now, I think a lot of people didn't think we'd get to this point, still be dealing with this the way that we are now, but we are. And I thought that we were going to get to the point where football was going to pay the price for it. But we had football. It was a little odd, but it was football. We'll see where we go from here, and see what kind of college football season we actually get, as we also get very, very close to the beginning of the NFL season. I mean, very close. September 10th, Houston at Kansas City. 7:20 on NBC. Week and a half away, which is quite crazy in its own right. But we'll do FYI. We come back. We got a couple things to talk about, but we'll do that on the Jmull Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the Jmull Show on a Monday, wrapping up the show with some FYI. Listen, it was a tough weekend. Hey, tough weekend's not the right word, but just there was a death over the weekend that just sort of rocked the entire country. Chadwick Boseman, the Black Panther, King T'Challa, played Jackie Robinson in 42, died on Friday evening after a 4-year battle with colon cancer. You know, he's one of the few, Chris Evans is a really good actor, great actor. And what he did in the role he played in Knives Out, I think, speaks to the fact that he's a really, really talented actor and not just a superhero. But Captain America turned Chris Evans into a superhero. Chadwick Boseman was a hero that made Black Panther what it was. Does that make sense? There's a small difference here, because at the end of the day, what you get is on both sides of things is two uber impactful from a cultural perspective superheroes in Captain America and Black Panther. But Chadwick Boseman made Black Panther what it was, and empowered young black people in this country to see a superhero that looked like them, partly because Chadwick Boseman was a superhero before he brought back Black Panther to life. He's one of those people who became synonymous with Black Panther, not because of Black Panther, but Black Panther became synonymous with Chadwick Boseman instead of the other way around. Does that make sense? Really big fan of him, and it's just a really horrible loss for the entertainment community, but also just this country, and the fact that what he was able to accomplish while battling colon cancer is absolutely ridiculous. And him talking about having to bulk up multiple times for Black Panther and Avengers movies, but then also have to let himself go for other roles. It's really, really absolutely astounding what he was able to accomplish during those 4 years. And then this morning, one of the most influential coaches of the last 50 years, John Thompson Jr., who turned Georgetown into the national brand that it became. One of the first African American coach to win a national championship. He died today at the age of, I believe, 78. but a very influential, 78 Hall of Fame coach, led the Hoyas to the title in 1984. One of the, there aren't many coaches that change the landscape of college basketball. You've got your all-time greats who did that, who have and who do that. Coach K, Calipari, Roy Williams, Jay Wright, John Wooden, Bob Knight, John Thompson. So anytime a sport loses a coach like this, it's a big deal. But, he was an incredibly influential man, and one of those coaches who had a lasting impact on that program. I think his son, John Thompson III, might have been, there longer than somebody with the success of John Thompson III would have actually been there. But because of who he was and because of what his father was and because of what that family turned Georgetown men's basketball into, there's certainly a level of respect there that was absolutely earned and absolutely should have been rewarded. But it was, lost a very important part of the college basketball community with John Thompson passing away at the age of 78. He's not nearly as old as I thought he was. But unfortunately, we lost John Thompson at the age of 78 today. And in some less important news, and something that I never thought would be the case, but when you really think about it, makes more sense than you think it would. The Jacksonville Jaguars have waived running back Leonard Fournette. He's now a free agent. And in the last 3 years, Fournette rushed for 2,631 yards and 17 touchdowns. It wasn't all that long ago that he was... when he got to the NFL, he kind of made a splash early. But in the last 3 seasons, his rushing grade ranks 37th, 31st, and 41st according to the PFF, which is basically data and analytics for the NFL. So it's one of those things, it's one of those names that wait, really? But then you look a little closer and it makes a lot more sense than you thought it might. But Leonard Fournette out in Jacksonville, and the team did not pick up the 5th year option of his contract. And then, of course, for your information, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern, Around the Bases with Chris Brown at 1 p.m. Eastern. Both of those shows live right here at 110sportsmedia.com/live or twitch.tv/110sports. I'll be back on Wednesday, talk more NBA, maybe some football. We'll see. But I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Please take care of yourselves. Stay safe. And I'll see you back here. Same place, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern on Wednesday.